Good. And we are back. Chris Stothers, welcome to H Hour.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh yeah, thanks for journeying over, coming across the pond in a plane. The better option than rowing.
Rowing or swimming. Yeah.
Swimming, yeah. No, I really appreciate your time, mate. And it's nice that you got to see some of the delights of London.
Yeah. The country lad in the big city.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't realise you've been out less than a year now, so it'll be a year in April.
It'll be 4th of April. Last year, I officially retired from the PSNI.
So the last year has been mayhem, I'm assuming, like trying to find your feet.
A lot of
What the hell is going
self-discovery, a
on?
lot of, finding my feet. What am I going to do now that I'm a grown-up? So yeah, last year's flown in.
Mm-hmm. Why did you get out in the first place?
I was diagnosed with PTSD, complex PTSD, and physical injuries through, I suppose, 22 years of policing, 21 and a bit years of policing. So why did I get out? It wasn't through my own choice. I was involved in a training exercise incident whereby I fell into the water, and I wouldn't say I almost drowned, but I felt like I was going to drown. And
Can you talk about the incident? What was the copper doing in the water?
yeah,
Near
so
water. Hang on a minute. You
in
patrol streets, don't you?
so the latter end of my career, the last 12 years of my career, I was a CTSFO within HMSU Headquarters Mobile Support Unit, which is part of C4 Special Operations Branch. There was a lot of letters there I just threw out, but so the latter end of my career I was a CTSFO, and towards the end I was doing a training exercise where we were climbing from an inflatable rib, up the side of a tanker, cargo type vessel to do some CQC on a boat. During that, there was a few mishaps, but during that, I was climbing from the caving ladder, got about halfway up, about 8 meters up the side of the ship, and ended up falling into the water. I had full kit on, flak jacket, rifle slung, and a ballistic helmet. And although I was only in the water for moments, it felt like an age. And
Were you under?
yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I was under the water. I was going to say BCD, but the life vest didn't, because of the ASL ascending device, the safety line, caught at the very last moment. So my head and chest were under the water, but my legs were out of the water. The sort of lower half of my body was out of the water. So the life jacket didn't inflate.
It didn't think you were in danger.
Yeah, because it didn't think I was in the water.
Oh, shit.
So yeah, that happened. Now, when I got out of the water, I was laughing and joking, fucking idiot, fell in the water, laughing with the boys, and that was fine. I went home that night and didn't sleep, and that was the start of the spiral of.
Do you know why you didn't sleep? Were you reliving things, or was it just you couldn't get to sleep? So what was that situation like?
Anytime I got to sleep, I woke up in cold sweats, having a nightmare, thinking that I was drowning.
Oh,
So
shit.
yeah, so I kept waking up. I suppose flashbacks, intrusive thoughts, nightmares, night terrors, and my now wife, she, more times than enough, I woke up, she had her hand on my chest, because I was having a bit of a night terror. That incident itself, it's not the worst thing by any stretch that I've been involved in, but it was undoubtedly the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds. It doesn't sound like it was a pleasant experience, mate. And it's strange how some things, which are other people perceive as extremely traumatic, like you've been shot, for example.
Yeah.
At least once. I'm assuming it's just the once, but maybe more than once. Another near-death experiences, and then all the way down the line, something that you just described as it wasn't that bad, actually really messes you up.
Yeah, well, it wasn't that bad, and I still look back and, I think it was one of those things. And I've always had the attitude. I'm the eldest of four boys. The big brother, give yourself a shake, flipping tighten up and get on with it. That's always been my attitude. So when this happened and I started to spiral, it really it threw me, massively threw me. Looking back, it's by no stretch was it the worst thing to ever happen to me. I fell in the water. I did hurt myself, physically and ultimately emotionally and mentally. But yeah, yeah. Sorry, I went on a bit of a tangent there. Apologies.
No, 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 no. It's fine. And also, you relaxed a lot since you first came in. But I know that there's a level of I saw the nervousness around today. Like you were saying that because you were saying that obviously there's a it's not common for people with your background to come out and publicly discuss these things, or even you know publicly connect yourself to PSNI or other security forces in Northern Ireland. So
Yeah.
you know, what? So why are you doing it then?
Well, there's a couple of facets to it. I suppose the first facet is to try and raise that awareness around the mental health and the support, not only police officers, but military, blue light industries, paramedics, doctors, the support that they need around mental health, PTSD, you know, that's one element to it. Because when I eventually had the courage to put my hand up and say, I'm not I'm not feeling 100% here, I'm struggling, the support wasn't there. So that's one facet to it. The other facet is I want to try and break down some of those barriers within Northern Ireland. I still, if a police officer in Northern Ireland will not tell anybody outside of their inner circle they're a police officer, well, very few. Whereas somebody in the Met, somebody in the Guards down in the south of Ireland, what do you do for a living? I'm a police officer. I'm a guard. In Northern Ireland, you can't say that because there is still to this day a terrorist threat. Still is that threat to police officers. So I'm doing this to try and normalise policing a bit in Northern Ireland and make it acceptable to say I'm a police officer. I'm very proud of what I've been involved in. I'm very proud to have served. I know that through my job, I've helped people. From I was a uniformed police officer in North Belfast till I was a CTSFO. Undoubtedly, I've been involved in saving lives and helping people, and I'm very proud of that. So why should I be embarrassed about it? Why should I hide the fact that I have done these things? You know, and I look at it to take that a step further. My son, who has just turned 17, has talked about maybe one day joining the police. So I want to make that job safer and reduce that threat and risk to my son and people of his generation. Northern Ireland is moving in that sort of space now. So why not try and help it along? Why not do this?
Mm. Yeah, no, it's a brave thing to do. And I totally get it. And in fact, it just reminds me of I know on the icebreaker and off air I was talking about reading a lady called Maria Cahill's Cahill CAHA CA
Cahill?
Cahill. Okay,
Yeah.
Maria Cahill. Okay, sorry Maria if you're listening. Um, and in a similar way to what you're doing, her writing the book was putting us exposing herself at the same time because she said a lot of not nice things about the IRA, not nice things about Jerry Adams and a number of other key personalities in there, but she, from in her point, I'm going to come on to a question on this. There's a reason I mentioned this because there's stuff in there that I read that I went, holy shit. Where she was concerned, she was doing it did it for the same reasons as you did, as you are doing it. And that is that she was a victim of sexual abuse over a prolonged period of time from IRA members, and it was was and maybe still it is less so I hope like endemic within their ranks so to speak. And like she came out and decided to write the book years after it happened, when it got to a point that she felt it was safe enough that she wasn't going to get topped or kneecapped to do it. um Years later to hide to same thing to try and prevent similar things happening to other young people, predominantly young women. So I yeah I get it. you've relaxed a lot since the start of the icebreaker. Like you're moving now. But no, I get it, man, I appreciate you doing it, because raising awareness and flying that flag for support services, for blue light services in Northern Ireland, that carries over the water over here. You know, it helps the cause over here for other people who are doing the same thing over here. We mentioned Ash Price, mentioned Jackie Malton, mentioned a few others. You know, and we got the episode before this was Gaz Hayes. So it's important. It's important.
Yeah.
Go
You
on.
know, it just dawned on me as you were speaking there when you were chatting about Ray Cahill's book. I didn't really remember who it was, but now you've chatted about it. I think she was Jerry Adams' niece, and yeah. So I do.
She Jerry. I can't remember. She was Jerry's niece, I think. Yeah, his niece, or he was a very close friend of the family. Yeah, I think she was his
Yeah,
niece.
yeah. I
But
do.
in that book, I don't want it to be the Maria Kyle show, because she's actually said yes to come on the podcast.
Oh, very
I'm
good.
trying, but that was last year. I'm trying to line up a date. She doesn't get over here very often, but I'm trying to line it up because her experiences are on the inside of that whole thing would be amazing. In a book, one of the things that really surprised me, the book's called Rough Beast. In a book, one of the things that really surprised me, and again, I referenced I served a couple of times in Northern Ireland with the British military, but I was so naive and ignorant of actually what the situation was over there until recently, when I started reading up on these things, because she's coming on and because you're coming on. And one of the things in a book that really surprised me, and she was talking about the 80s, she was talking about the 90s and early noughties, was the influence that terrorist organizations in Northern Ireland, so IRA is an example, prime example, obviously, have the influence they have on security services in Northern Ireland. So, and one of the things is that there seemed to be at the time, and I'm not sure if this still exists, but it seemed to be at the time in certain areas of Northern Ireland, areas or types of alleged offences or situations where PSNI or IEC back in the day, and PSNI would take a hands-off approach and leave the IRA, for example, deal with it, like community justice kind of thing, which quite often, more often than not, seems to be not the greatest thing to do. But the influence that the IRA had was so strong, maybe is still very strong, that the PSNI had no choice but to take this approach and go, well, we can't do anything about it. Sorry,
Yeah. Well,
your
excuse me.
uncle Jerry's going to deal with it.
Yeah, and I suppose not only the IRA, but within the loyalist communities, you know, the UVF, UDA, the paramilitaries ran those areas. You know, the IRA in nationalist areas were seen as rock stars at that time because they were perceived to be doing, you know, fighting the good fight for the people of that area, which, you know, in hindsight, a lot of it was criminality on both sides of the divide. There was a lot of areas, certainly within my policing experience, there's a lot of areas where you police didn't really have a grip on those areas, and I can talk about Ardoyne, the New Lodge, Shankill Estate. You know, the paramilitaries within those areas at certain times ran the place. The police could only come into a lot of those areas with the acceptance of the community, and well, not only the community but those paramilitary organizations. So it's a very, very complex question. It's a very complex scenario. Ideally, would policing have taken a hands-off approach? Absolutely not. You know, you want to be in there and, you know, being that deterrent, and but a lot of times you can't go in there because there's a greater threat to the officers on the ground. So they can't go into a certain area because at a certain time there's a threat on police. You know, marching season, you couldn't really go into a lot of loyalist areas during the marching season because you became the butt of that attack. And should that be stones, bricks, bottles, petrol bombs, and the same with the nationalist community as well. So I think it's one of those idiosyncrasies of Northern Ireland. You know, in certain areas, policing is done. policing takes place in a lot of those areas because it's allowed to by certain paramilitary organizations. Um, that has changed greatly, in latter years. That has changed massively.
The influence has been reduced.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think not everybody, but I think a lot of people are on board now with the peace process, and to see that the way forward, for Northern Ireland to move forward in peace is a shared space. Is people need to embrace policing. There needs to be proper policing in those areas. It can't be, justice can't be administered by guys in back alleys. That's just not acceptable. And you know, hopefully lessons have been learned, and now the community are wanting to move forward. A lot of those communities want to move forward and engage with the police. And I think that's massive, and a lot of that is because of the political situation now. Because we there is that engagement at a political level. There's that acceptance at a political level now that the only way forward is united and together. So I've totally faffed around that
No, no,
sort of
no, no, no,
question, but yeah.
no, no. What about? So, what's this? How's the situation? What's the reality of the situation over there in terms of how do I say this? Social content or social discontent with the DUP and the Sinn Féin leadership going on. Has it created problems? Is not from. I mean, and the reason I ask that is that it's been very obvious to me over the last 10 years that we get like the news we get on here in England, Wales, Britain, Scotland, England, Wales, Britain, England, Wales, Scotland, the mainland, right, about
Yeah.
what's going on Northern Ireland is very, very filtered. I could go and look at a Northern Irish local paper or national paper over there and find out about violent incidents that have occurred. You go, oh my God, that would make the news if that was over here.
Yeah.
Shootings, for example, that would make the news if that was happening in England, and we don't hear about it. And I'm not sure why that happens. But maybe one of the reasons that happens is because the government, the British government, don't want to highlight like how you're describing how it's like it seems a bit better over there now. There's less influence from the terrorism side into policing, as an example, but that's all relative, right? Like if you were to compare, I suggest that if you were to compare the situation in Northern Ireland and compare it to the situation in England in terms of policing, social content, social discontent, the relationship between terrorist organizations and police organizations, you go, my God, Northern Ireland's crazy.
Yeah.
But in relative terms, Northern Ireland compared to 20 years ago, well, it's
Massive difference.
It's
Yeah.
very peaceful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, 100%. Sort of to take that back, I grew up on the Ards Peninsula in Northern Ireland. Very, very mixed community. Catholic friends, Protestant friends. My mother's Catholic, dad Protestant. So religion within our household, it wasn't really an issue. And then at 20, I joined the PSNI. Once I had finished in the police training college in Garnival, I was
How old are you?
20.
No, how old are you now?
Oh, 20, 43.
Fucking 20.
43.
Are you really?
Yeah.
I'm 43. Right, so
I've had
about
hard
the
paper
same
round.
time. So about the same, just before you joined the PSNI, I joined the military. And people who listen to this, some of them are aware. My father was raised Catholic. He's Scottish. My
Yeah.
mother is Catholic and from just outside Dublin.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we face some similar dynamics. Oh, my mother
Yeah.
certainly did. Okay, interesting. All right, okay, right. So
yeah.
you're starting off our service at the same time, different side. Okay.
So I went to police training college. 20. Mum was a real warrior. She didn't want me joining the police, but for obvious reasons. Went to police training college, passed out, and was stationed in North Belfast, which is 30 miles from where I grew up. Might as well have been in Kandahar. It was a totally alien environment to what I was used to. My first day driving in to work, there were armoured Land Rovers parked along the route as we went to the station. Guys outstanding holding MP5s, covering the changeover coming in. Then into the station, you could brief, change, whatever. And you had to go out in the mornings and open the gates. So there was a gate on the Limestone Road, which was locked every night and opened every morning to let the two communities mix. There was a gate on the
Wild, isn't it? Wild.
wild. There was a gate on the Whitewell, same, and the Shankill Road between the Springfield Road. So those gates were opened every morning. And then, every day we had crews in public order kit, because rioting just happened at a moment's notice. I was there 2 weeks, and it was a Sunday afternoon, and the calls started coming in, order and shop fronts. So we one truck up to order and shop fronts, and there was a couple of hundred out either side, and we were just going around this roundabout trying to keep the crowd apart. I was like, what's going on? So there was a couple of hundred rioting at order and shop fronts, Catholic, Protestant, Loyalists, Nationalists, whatever you want to say. And I asked the guys, full-time reserve guy in the back of the truck, what are they rioting over? He says, Rangers are playing Celtic. It's like, Rangers are playing Celtic. I don't even like football, but Rangers are playing Celtic, and that was enough for a riot to kick off. So that was my sort of introduction to policing in North Belfast. Yeah, it is a strange place. The sort of, to go back to what you were chatting about, the news that you get on the mainland UK, it is sanitized. There's no doubt it is sanitized. I only look the difference between the BBC Northern Ireland website and the BBC UK website. There's very little that makes it within Northern Ireland makes it onto the UK website. Why is that? I don't know. I don't have the answer for that. I would imagine probably economics come into it to a certain degree.
Politics.
Yeah,
economics.
politics. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they're over there, just let them get on with it. I know that's not the case, but it's I suppose the other side to that is punishment shootings and punishment beatings, paramilitary type policing or whatever is definitely greatly reduced. But at one point, it probably was white noise. Would you report that every day? Because it was happening fairly regular. So at what point does that become unreportable? Does it become just another story? So is there an element of that as well? I don't know.
No, yeah, I know what you mean. The thing is, some would say, okay, it's fine to have that kind of stuff. Have it. I get it. I get that there can be a place for it. The problem is when the reason we have organized formal police forces is because we've learned over time you need to have organized formal police forces, because if you don't have it that way, then the justice being dished out basically becomes, it's not always fair, should we say, and sometimes it's dealt out and unnecessarily harshly or for totally bullshit reasons, and people again are trying to move their own interests forward at the expense of other people. But one thing always gets me about the island and the Northern Ireland, the Troubles, is that religious side. If you got I understand literally the nation state issues side, Ireland, Northern Ireland. I understand that, right? But it's the religious side that always gets me, and also the connection between the religious side and the football aspect. And I feel like that only exists, has been allowed to exist, because it benefits a lot of people to have that rivalry going on at the expense of many things, like to be disagreeing with each other in the 21st century, to have a literal hatred for someone else, right? Because they wear a certain football shirt, right? Or because they believe in one type of the same religion that you're part of, Christianity you don't, is wild.
Yeah.
It's like, what are we, cavemen?
I know.
It's wild, and it's also like it's a total embarrassment. You see, it's one of the things I don't like about football, but I won't go into that. But you see those Celtic Rangers games and the way those adults, and kids, but mainly adults, behave. You just a total embarrassment, and also I think it actually degrades the valid historical ill feeling and that Irish people have about the British being in Northern Ireland. There's absolutely valid claims there, to say that's ours, I want it back. Yeah, but you can't deny that. You can't deny that. Whether you can't deny that they can see it's a valid claim.
Yeah.
But the other side of it is just crazy. And it must make it super difficult to police as well.
Oh, 100%. But that is a problem which has went back hundreds and hundreds of years. So, but it has become distorted through the years. So, as you say, it's, Rangers and Celtic, that's not what the trouble started over. They didn't start over a football team. That's not what, the conflict, many years before that started over. It wasn't over a football team, but it's just been, I suppose, hijacked by those political sort of terrorist type organizations, and it becomes tribal then, and it very much is tribal. I'm wearing a Celtic top, I'm the Nationalist community, I'm wearing a Rangers top, I'm part of the Loyalist community. That has changed massively now, I have to say. There has been, I think there's a greater acceptance that a lot of these issues are social. A lot of the, you don't have well-off Protestants fighting with well-off Catholics. This is all done at ground level. So it's these, undoubtedly there's social issues. They're the same issues, but on the other side of the fence. It's crazy. Policing, you're never going to solve these issues. All you can try and do is police it, and that makes it very difficult. It does make it very difficult.
So did you choose to go onto the CT side of things when you were serving?
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
You can put yourself forward for it.
Yeah, so I was due. I applied for, I suppose it would be the SFO role, which was the SOB support unit. I'd applied to go into that.
Oh, SOB, Special Operations Branch.
Special Operations Branch support unit. I had applied to go into it, only because HMSU hadn't been out for a number of years, and that was seen as a stepping stone. So I initially applied for that. Went on selection, which was shorter. It's only a 4-day selection, and was successful, and found out that I was going into further training. 2 weeks before I was due to start further training, I was shot.
Oh, I thought you were shot during your CT time.
No.
Oh, wow.
No.
Okay, go on. Okay, sorry.
So I was shot 11th of July. I'll move back. I'll chat about the CT sort of the way I moved into that role. But so I was shot 11th July 2010. I should have started further training in 2 weeks' time, but obviously I'd been shot, so that was off the cards. And I then came back. To work about 10 months later, and by this time HMSU had come out for applications. So I put in for HMSU for Special Operations Branch, the CT SFO role as it was, and had to go on selection again. This time it was a 7-day selection process in McGilligan. And I was driving out of Belfast. It was the 5th of December 2011. So less than a year and a half after being shot, driving out of Belfast, and it was snowing so hard on the windscreen, my window wipers weren't clearing the screen quick enough. I thought, what the fuck am I doing here? Driving up to, but it's what I want to do. I didn't join the police to hand out parking tickets to, not that there's anything wrong with that, but my admin has always been crap. My paperwork has always been crap. So that's the role I knew I was best suited in, that sort of role. And
well, you made the cardinal sin of waiting last minute to book a hotel in London and found out the hard way, didn't you?
I did.
How did you end up getting shot? What happened?
So, yeah, it was a riot. It was the 11th night, 2010.
11th night of riots.
The 11th of July. So obviously you have the 11th night, the bonfire night, and then you have the 12th of July, the marching season, middle of marching season. That would be like the
Do you want to explain to people? Sorry to do this to you because I know it's.
no.
Do you want to explain to people marching season and everything around that? There are people who listen to this who have got no idea,
Yeah.
about all that side of
Yeah,
things.
sorry, apologies. So marching season would basically start on the 1st of January and end on the 31st of December. Every weekend there seems to be a march, but traditionally marching season was the summer period, sort of early spring, summer period. And it's when loyalist bands would march, and it's just a celebration of King William's victory over Prince William's victory over King James. So seen as to be the sort of Protestant victory over the Catholic King James. So that's celebrated every year. The sort of biggest day in the calendar would be the 12th of July. So Northern Ireland comes to a standstill, bands marching all over the province. The night before that is the 11th night celebrations, where bonfires, massive bonfires are built and lit on the 11th night. And my history wouldn't be great, but I believe the significance of that was bonfires were lit along the River Boyne to guide the ships, King Billy's ships, as it were, to guide them up the Boyne to take part in the battle. So I believe that's the significance of it.
Yeah, these bonfires, predominantly in Unionist areas, symbolise the lighting of fires to welcome and guide King William III, King Billy, when he landed in Ireland. Historically, these bonfires were smaller and more numerous, but over time, communities have consolidated their resources to build larger bonfires. Look at the picture. Oh my God, they're massive.
Oh, they're massive.
Oh, they're
Yeah.
huge. Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm.
That is huge.
I believe the world record is held at Ballycrigg Estate in Larne, and it's a massive. That's a world record.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's marching season. Oh,
yeah, so that essentially that's marching season, and every year.
God, that rubs it in the faces of the Catholics, doesn't it? That rubs it right in the faces, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, I suppose it does. There's two sides to the coin. Yeah, there's two sides to the coin. I suppose it's seen as the traditional heritage, and they're celebrating it every year. And I suppose if it's done within that community, their own community, that there shouldn't really be any upset. You flip that round to Easter. So there's parades take place during Easter, and that's to celebrate the uprising, the 1916 uprising, the Easter Rising. So that takes place in nationalist areas. So there's two sides to the coin. And again, as a police officer, I'm not there to decide who's right and who's wrong. You're just there to police it and make sure nobody gets hurt. Do I have any? I have no real skin in the game because I don't care. I really genuinely mean that. I don't care. Why can't everyone just get along? Do you know what I mean? Personally, I think it's a bit of a nonsense, both sides of it. I see the validity and the traditionalism in both sides, and I'm happy for everyone to celebrate what they see as sacred and worth celebrating. It doesn't affect me, so I'm not going out of my way to allow it to be offended at it, I suppose. So that's my take on it.
No, I agree with you. It's not you don't want to invalidate Catholic or Irish claims to that part of that island.
Yeah.
So I get it. All right, you may be a bit upset.
Yeah.
I'm a Welshman.
Yeah.
Like, there's a reason that the Welsh hate the English. There's a reason that the Scottish hate the English. And there is absolutely, in some parts of those countries, an element of hate there. And it's like, there's reasons for it, which most English people don't know.
Yeah.
Because you came in and you fucked us over. That's what happened in the past. And we remember that.
Yeah.
We don't like it. It doesn't come from nowhere.
Yeah.
Anyway,
But I think,
it
sorry,
gets go
I
on.
think it's an education piece as well, because
Right.
people don't know their history. I don't profess to know my history, but I have a rough grasp of
Yeah.
the history of Ireland, Northern Ireland, or the north of Ireland, as some people would prefer to call it. But I have a rough grasp of that history, but a lot of people don't. So they have this indoctrinated belief that, we're fighting the English because of this, we're fighting the Protestants because of this, we're fighting the Catholics because of this, but they don't really
Quite
understand their
often, there's not
history.
even a because, though. Quite often, it's not even a
Yeah,
because. The people grow up this like d- believing a thing simply because they were taught to or told to.
learned behavior.
There's not
Yeah,
even a because.
no,
And then and those people are obvious because they can't articulate the argument. They
yeah,
can't articulate why they think what they think further than an angry answer response.
yeah,
Because they're bastards.
yeah.
Because because it's out whatever. Because
Well,
they're Protestant. Because they're
I'll
Catholic.
I'll give you an
You
example
know.
of that. So I worked with a guy when I was in North Belfast. I worked with a guy, very, very well spoken Englishman, great guy. Um, and we had arrested a young fellow joyrider. He's only 15, 16. He'd stolen a car and went on a bit of a rampage. We arrested him and put him in the back of the Land Rover. And he heard my colleague speaking, heard his English accent. And he said, "What are you talking about, you English bastard? It should be United Ireland anyway." And he didn't miss a beat. He just said, "Absolutely, Sonny, I totally agree. Her Majesty should take it all back." And he just, it was just over his head. But it just, to me, it sort of highlighted. Now it was funny and we laughed and joked about it, but it highlighted that that kid who he, he had never been educated around his history, but yet he believed that rightly or wrongly should have been a united Ireland because that's all he knew. This is all the murals on the wall, all the flipping the propaganda that he had seen and been brought up, surrounded with. So it's that learned behavior. He didn't actually know himself. He didn't have, you know. Anyway, that was just a sort of an example I have of how there's needs to be a massive education piece around all of this, in my opinion, for for everybody within Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
You know,
The thing is, back to what you were saying about, why can't we all, you were basically saying, why can't we all just get along?
yeah,
And the thing is, if you give the situation there any real thought into, okay, what are the possible, what could we possibly change? What could we realistically change if we wanted to? Okay, and this is real high level. Is it feasible at all that if Britain turned around and said, "Yeah, right, have Northern Ireland back as part of Ireland again"? No problems, major problems for longer. Because all of a sudden you've got a load of British people are now living in Ireland and they ain't happy.
yeah,
Guess what? Terrorism and rioting. It's like you're
yeah,
just sort of almost reigniting the problem. Does that mean it's okay what's happened in the past? No. Does it mean that we are where we are? Let's try and all get along with it, and
yeah.
we'll try and make up for some nastiness we did in the past if we did some, which those kind of things have happened. And it's not just that's an example, Northern Ireland. Another example is Israel, Palestine. Pick your examples from around the world. It's
Yeah.
not, it's almost like your part of the world has evolved to this spot. Okay, people are unhappy in the way it's got you, but this is where we are.
Yeah.
And if we try and make any drastic changes with it, fundamental changes, try and reverse to where we were before, it's going to make more problems and make it harder to live here, impoverish people for sure, and just extend the game and reduce the game back to what it was before, which is more violence, more social discontent, more, more nefarious organizations popping up here, there, and everywhere and taking advantage of people, which is what I would argue, which is what, the freedom fighter element turned into.
Mhm.
Over the 80s into the 90s, I think there was definitely a change in what those organizations were trying to achieve. They could have said they were standing for one thing, a united Ireland, for example, but in reality, what they were trying to achieve was compromised by, I'd say, personal greed for money and power.
Absolutely, yeah.
It,
Yeah,
it
I'd agree with that.
became more like gang culture
Yeah.
as opposed to genuine freedom fighter orientated organizations. Does that make sense? Am I wrong? I mean,
No,
you live
yeah,
there. I
no,
know.
you're right, and that still goes on. You know, there's areas within Northern Ireland, Derry, Londonderry, whatever way you want to call it. You've the Bogside, the Craigan, which are still, I don't want to say no-go areas for police, but they're very difficult areas for police to go into and police it in such a way that other parts of society are policed. So, and that again, that's on the loyalist side as well. You know, you have loyalist areas, you know, which are similar. So they it's that tribal politics. It's that, you know, they're those people are fighting under a flag. Let's say, do they control the drugs within that area? Do they control the flipping extortion? Do they? Of course they do. You know, it's no secret they do. But do I suppose it makes it easier if they're freedom fighters or they're fighting for this cause allegedly, but they still have a grip on this community under this guise, which is ultimately allowing them to engage in their criminality. You know, there's no doubt that takes place on both sides of the divide. You know, how do you break that down? It's very difficult. And how does Northern Ireland move forward with that still going, with, you know, that terrorist threat, you know, still present, slowly, very slowly, and society can only move at the rate of the slowest person. You know, you need to, in my opinion, again, this is only opinion. I've no flipping political sort of agenda in this, but we can only move forward if everybody is going to move forward with this, and we can only do it together. You know, Northern Ireland can only move forward together, and that's with proper engagement with police, and that's with, you know, proper engagement with welfare reform. You know, there's so many different facets to it, and it's a very complex issue. You know, yeah, that's
All right. Let's pull it all the way back. It's the 11th of July 2010.
yes. We went on a bit of a tangent there, didn't we?
I've been sitting you going, how did you get to this? Oh yeah, the question. How did you get shot? All right, cool.
Yeah.
That, in all seriousness, that's a good explanation, good summary of.
We started talking about
Marge's
bonfires.
All right, 11th of July 2010.
So 11th July, there was quite a lot of rioting, public disorder in Belfast, mainly over towards the Donegal Road, which would be an interface between nationalist and loyalist.
Interface. It's a good way to describe it.
Yeah. Well, it is. So within North Belfast, there were, I don't know, 30 interfaces where nationalist and loyalist communities met each other. The peace line, you know, so you would have peace walls separating the two communities to stop those riots and stop those sort of negative interactions. So to go back, 11th of July 2010, there was rioting throughout Belfast. I was part of a public order unit within North Belfast, and we were six armoured Land Rovers with 4 people in each crew. The unit had actually been split, and then reports started to come in of crowds gathering on North Queen Street. So North Queen Street would be an interface, which is where the New Lodge nationalist area meets Tigers Bay, a loyalist area. Crowds have been gathering on that North Queen Street. So I was in Alpha, the inspector's crew, and our crew and Bravo, the 2 crews went down to have a look and see what was taking place. As we arrived, we could see there was a bit of a crowd who gathered at the junction of Victoria Parade, North Queen Street. And the inspector, who was an Englishman from Leicestershire, instructed the truck to stop. He seen one of the community reps and wanted to speak to him. The inspector hadn't been there that long, and I don't want to badmouth him but I am going to a bit here. He really didn't have a grasp of the complexities of policing within North Belfast. He'd spent most of the night telling us about football riots he'd dealt with, and
Um,
all this sort of carry on. He's a Leicestershire man, and it was quite clear fairly quickly he was out of his depth.
in what way? Like,
So within,
why was it super clear?
because he just didn't seem to have the concept that a riot in Northern Ireland isn't like a football riot. A riot within Northern Ireland, there's normally petrol bombs, not always, but quite often there's petrol bombs, blast bombs, or a ballistic threat involved. He just
Is that the same to this day?
Yeah, well, it would be. It would be not as much now. We don't get as much rat now. There's no doubt the ratting. I can't remember the last bad riot. Probably a couple of years ago now, 2-3 years ago was the last bad one. I stand to be corrected. There may have been riots since then, but traditionally there would have been that threat and risk around public disorder, because, as we sort of talked about, the subversive elements within those societies would use rioting as, I suppose, a guise to mount an attack on security forces, on whether that be military or police. So there's always that. You always had to treat it that there was a threat around that. He didn't really seem to have that concept, and a few times in the past he let himself down previously in previous events. He let himself down with some of the I suppose the tactical judgments he had made. He stopped anyway to speak to the community rep, and at that point, we became the focus of the attack. So bricks, bottles started raining down. We only had two trucks at this stage, so stuff started raining down on us. I said to the inspector, "We don't need to be here." The community rep, who was a Sinn Féin community rep, clearly told him, "I have no control over this." And I suppose another element to that was, another element to the lack of his understanding, he was possibly putting the community rep in harm's way by speaking to him, because at that time Sinn Féin probably weren't openly engaging with police. So for the community rep to be seen to be openly speaking to a police officer and being on the side or trying to, it probably wasn't a great.
So, sorry, a question. The community rep. How are they designated? Who chooses who the community rep is?
I wouldn't say that.
Paramilitary organisations.
Yeah, possibly. I don't think there's a ballot held. So
You're kidding.
yeah, so I think, I don't know, but generally a Sinn Féin community rep, or wherever that may be, whatever side of the community, but they've come through various stages of representing the community in one way or the other, and found themselves, being a representative for that community, spokesperson for that community. So
It's possible that they're upstanding members of the community, and
of course it is. Of course,
so
yeah.
it's also possible that they're not.
Yeah.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And so, was he engaged in this community rep, like in full view of it? It wasn't like a
He was trying to speak to him.
closed room meeting.
No,
okay, right.
so this was in front of the riders. This was
yeah.
So I said to him, I was quite vocal, and I said to him, "Inspector, we don't need to be here." I had dealt with, not I had dealt with, but I had been involved with much worse riots, but they were dealt with properly. And once the command and control sort of fell down, that's where a lot of the issues on that night sort of broke down. But I made my point that we don't need to be here. We're now the focus of the attack. Crowds started to swell a bit. There wasn't big numbers, but maybe 30, 40 at that point. Crowds started to swell. They could see that the trucks were stopped. We were out on foot. So now they've got a target. They're throwing bricks, bottles, whatever else towards us.
Are both sides doing it?
No, this was just the nationalist community. Yeah. On any other night, it could have been the loyalist community, but on this particular night, it was the nationalist community. So I made the point to the inspector, where we had stopped the trucks, we were in a position of being flanked, because there's a series of alleyways which would have ran round and put the riders in front of us, so we would have had two battle fronts essentially. So I made that point to the inspector, and to be fair, he did listen and pulled the two trucks back beyond New Lodge Road, putting us between the nationalist community and the loyalist community, which ultimately is the goal. You want to try and keep those two communities separated so that nothing further escalates. As we did this, a number of the crowd started to make their way down towards the loyalist community. And without saying a word, the inspector got out of the truck by himself and tried to speak to them to put them back. So at this point, I got out. I was a baton gunner. I was a baton gunner for the crew. At that point, I got out and told him, Inspector, we need to get back in the truck, crew up here. We didn't. It just turned into hand-to-hand fighting. So we hadn't even an opportunity to get shields out. So the other crew dismounted as well.
It did turn into hand-to-hand fighting.
Oh, it did, yeah, yeah. At that point, so the crowd had sort of made their way down. There's probably, I don't know, say a dozen maybe, and we just ended up fighting with them, just hand to hand, trying to keep them back. And yeah,
They were trying to batter you to get through to the other side, just trying to batter you because
they were trying to batter us, but they were trying to get down to the other side. We were trying to stop them. They were, we were the subject of their attack. They're, ultimately
how big
we're
is
the
the
enemy.
crew in total? So it's two of you at first.
There was two, the two of us. So I got out with the inspector. One of the other guy got out with me, and then the other crew. To be honest, I can't rightly remember because it just escalated. We were then joined by local police. So we were in public order coveralls, with pads on for public disorder. Another crew arrived who were local station, sort of green uniform, and it turned into hand-to-hand fighting essentially. It was hot and heavy for a bit, and we managed to get the shields out. The rest of our unit eventually came down and joined us. We got the shields out and managed to get a shield line in, and just kept the crowd back. And again, it just sort of, the crowd started to swell. More bricks, masonry, bits and pieces started coming in. A few shields got broke, and yeah, it was just hot and heavy.
Did you sense before that? Did you develop a sense before that of knowing when there's, you can feel friction in the air, like there's like an electricity
Nearly
in the air, and
taste
you
it.
go,
Yeah,
this is, one little thing, this is a tinderbox, one little thing, this will go violent.
yeah.
And I think it's this particular feeling that only exists in those situations where it's basically mob.
Yeah.
You're dealing with mobs.
Yeah.
You're dealing with unpredictable, just bog standard people.
Yeah.
Like just people, not soldiers, not freedom fighters, not terrorists. These are just bog standard people who are kicking off. They're a heightened state of alertness. They're a heightened state of anger or emotional heightened state. And then, but they're not violent yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think even to take that back, during the days prior to that, you could feel the tension in the air.
Oh, really?
You could definitely feel
different to previous years.
Yeah. Well, I've experienced it quite a few times. 2005 during the White Rock riots, like that was probably the most violent in relation to public disorder I ever experienced, was 2005. And again, you could feel that tension in the air. You could feel, and there was some news reporting around it. There was, I suppose, different elements to it, but you just felt one spark, and this is going to kick off. And it was very much like that on that night, 11th of July 2010. So yeah,
so you're fighting in the street.
We're fighting in the street. We got a shield line in. A few shields got broken just by having heavy masonry coming in, and I'll never forget. There was a guy who came up to my shield and he was trying to punch it, and well, he wasn't trying to punch it. He was punching my shield, throwing breeze blocks at it and masonry at it, and he got right up in my face as close as he could. I said, "What about the widow Carol?" And so Stevie Carroll was a PSNI officer who was shot a number of years before, and he started sort of talking about him and the only good peeler's a dead peeler. peeler police officer, as a dead peeler, and he started shouting, and I
He's
remember,
trying to antagonize you.
yeah, and I remember thinking at the time, as soon as we break here, I'm gonna wrap my stick around your neck, and that's being totally honest. I just thought, if I get the opportunity, I'm taking you out here. Um, but that was sort of the intensity of it. There was stuff raining down on us, and then eventually, after I don't know how long, the inspector came. I'd dropped back to take control of our subunit because the inspector was running around like a headless chicken, to be honest.
Were they petrol bombing you?
Was there petrol at that stage? I can't honestly remember. I don't think there was. Possibly. I can't remember. Honestly, can't remember if there was petrol at that stage or not. I certainly wasn't hit with petrol at that stage. So I dropped back to take control of our subunit. The two others in the subunit, a female police officer and a male police officer. It was the first riot that either of them had been in. And I'll never forget. I never forget her face. Lovely, lovely girl. Previously had been a nurse, and she was petrified. So trying to reassure her and, say, listen, everything's okay. We've got this, and just do X, Y, and Z. Also, whilst trying to speak to the inspector, I was asking the inspector. We had plastic, we had baton guns there. I kept saying to the inspector, we need to be firing plastic here to keep the crowd back, because we didn't have that sterile zone. The crowd were literally right up on us. Once you deploy plastic, once you deploy that baton round, it creates that space, it creates that breathing space. But he just seemed to be spiraling out of control. Didn't really.
So he has to authorize that, does he?
Well, he has to ask. So
You can't just do it off your own back unless it's to self-defense.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
okay.
So he has to ask. He was the bronze on the ground. He has to ask silver for authorization. Now he did. I don't know again if it was part of his, I'll say, English mentality, but his previous experience of policing in England, whereby it was seen as,
Yeah, because it doesn't seem like that. I mean, I only know from my own experience with it
mm,
over there. Baton rounds doesn't seem that big of an escalation.
no,
This isn't like shooting a bullet.
no,
And don't get me wrong, they hurt,
yeah,
but they're not, surely not that big of an escalation. It makes sense to me what you're saying.
yeah,
Just like, let's get, because to actually your point, and that girl, the woman being frightened, men too, like,
yeah,
I can visualize what you're talking about, because I have very thankfully not been in a riot in all night, but I've done all the training.
yeah,
I've been with mob crowds in the Middle East,
yeah,
up close and personal, without public order kit, and it has been frightening, because you're at that point where if this goes pear shaped, I'm fucking dead. There's no two ways about it. I know I've interviewed a guy in here 2 or 3 times, and when he served in Northern Ireland in '05, when we went out for the marching season, he got dragged into the crowd out of the line. He was nearly gone. Save for the like heroic actions of another individual who went in and managed to get this guy out. He was nearly gone, battered. It is a frightening situation, because for people who aren't aware, you are literally inches away from these people. If it gets to that point that you're talking about, where they are right in front of you, in your shield talking, if you've got a shield and you're in your shield talking, they are inches away from you. They are literally, they can grab you, they can punch your shield, they can walk up with masonry, like you're saying. They can literally enact violence on you. They're that close to you. You're seeing the whites of the eyes of someone who a split second later could be trying to kill you. And that's whether you're on your own or whether you're with 10 or 20 people either side of you. It is a frightening thing to experience, and that's whether you're in a training situation or in a real situation like this. So I'm not surprised. Like, she was shitting bricks.
yeah. No, absolutely.
and the other guy who's with her.
Yeah,
Like, it's hard to describe how testing a situation that is to people who have not experienced it.
yeah. And I think that's asking for the authorization to fire baton rounds. It creates that sterile zone, and it creates that breathing space. The inspector, when I'd asked him a number of times, we need to be firing plastic here. We need to, we need to be deploying baton rounds. He kept asking for the water cannon, but we knew at that point both water cannons were over in Broadway and were inaccessible. He still didn't seem to want to make that call. And the threshold for using the button round, there needs to be, an immediate threat to life. Undoubtedly there was an immediate threat to life at that point. So he floundered a bit, and that's, I take nothing away from him. I have no malice towards him. At that time, he just
Inexperience.
inexperienced and out of his depth, and that's one of those things. After a while, we were joined by another unit, public order unit, who were sort of pulled in behind us and remained in their vehicles. And the inspector came to me and one of the other guys and said, "We're going to take the junction." So where we had stopped, if you remember, I said before, we'd pull back to stop us from being flanked. We had pulled back to the junction, so we essentially had two battle fronts, one in front of us, a lesser battle front to the right with a number of rioters. So the inspector said, "We're going to take the junction, and the navies, which were the other public order unit, are going to push down and take the main battlefront." So that was fine. The instructions then went up the line, and everybody, I made sure that the two in subunit I had control of were aware of what was taking place, as did the sergeant beside me and his ones. So everybody knew what was happening. And I explained to them, as soon as the order's given here, open order, rapid advance, we're going to right wheel and take the junction, and we're going to form up into another line. Everybody knew what was happening, except for the other public order unit, who were still in their vehicles, because the inspector hadn't told them of his plan. So I suppose, as much as that's on me for not noticing that the other unit weren't behind us, and I can't just say, there wasn't fault across the board, but primarily it was his. So, and that's me being diplomatic, but he fucked up. So the order was given, open order, rapid advance. We took the junction, and the unit sat. They didn't realize what was taking place. So now
This exposed you from the rear then?
Our whole flank was exposed. Yeah. Our armored Land Rovers, pushed forward and tried as best they could to push the crowd back. Unbeknownst to us, our flank was exposed at that point. We formed up in a line again, and then I heard the words "gunman, gunman," and then heard a loud bang, and felt this blast wave just wash over me. And I actually turned to the guy beside me. I said, "Fuck, mate, that was close," because I just felt this blast wave. No sooner were the words out of my mouth, and pain just hit me. The shield I'd been carrying was not a trail. I couldn't hold it up. And I just felt like my arm had exploded. I felt like I'd been hit with a breeze block. I didn't know at that point I'd been shot. But I had the presence of mind. I'd heard the call, gunman, knew there was a ballistic threat, and the presence of mind to get myself into hard cover. Got in behind one of the Land Rovers, and there's another inspector who had been sent down to try and get a grip of the situation. A guy with a lot of experience, a lot of public order experience. And I was in agony at this point. Adrenaline was still up. I was still functioning. And I turned to him. I said, "Boss, I think I've been hit. I think I've been hit with something." And I could feel the blood running down my chest. I could feel the blood welling up inside my blue suit. He started ripping the pads off me. And by this stage, the blood was quite heavily in my arm. Excuse me, inside my blue suit. And he said, "We need to get you to the hospital." There's a local police car, armored police car, parked on down the road. So I ran down to it with the inspector beside me. A friend of mine was in the car, and I said to him, "Stevie, I think I've been hit. Can you take me to hospital?" I got in the car. It drove me up to the Mater Hospital, short distance away, a mile and a half tops. As I knew it was sore, I knew I'd been hurt, but I still didn't grasp that I'd been shot. I actually thought I'd been hit with a blast bomb because it felt like that blast wave just washing over me. As we pulled into the Mater Hospital, there was a crash team waiting, nurses, doctor. I got out of the car, absolute agony, and got onto the bed. They cut the blue suit off me and put a line in. So there's an older nurse, and she got a line into me, fluids. I was dehydrated.
Why are you laughing then? When you said
I'm just laughing because the nurse put the line into me, and she started squeezing the bag, trying to get fluids into me. And she kept saying, "Stay with me, stay with me." I thought, "Fuck, I'm not going anywhere. I'm in hospital." I didn't realize how badly injured I was until I looked at my hands, and my hands were grey. I just looked like a
shit.
corpse. I thought, "Fuck, I'm not as good as I think here."
And you were, and so so your extremities, basically, as your extremities shutting down, going into
I was
emergency
shocked.
survival mode,
Yeah,
bringing all of the bodily resources to the core,
yeah,
like emergency measures. But yet you are still completely conscious and not realizing how serious it is.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So she was squeezing the bag, getting fluids into me. Blue suit was cut off, and then I looked at my arm. My arm was sort of hanging open quite a bit. A lot of puncture wounds in my chest and down in my abdomen. And probably that was the point I realized I'm not as good as I think here. And the doctor, sorry, the surgeon, a guy called Mark Taylor, phenomenal guy, came in and said, "We're taking you for surgery." I was starting to get compartment syndrome in my hand, I think because there's so much damage to my tricep or my arm. Hand was starting to close, and they believed I'd internal bleeding as well. So we're rushing in for surgery. At that point, I thought, I don't want somebody ringing home. Um, Mom and dad were at home with my children, looking after my children. So I rang the house phone. Dad answered. It's about 3 in the morning, I think,
Before surgery.
before surgery. I just didn't want a colleague ringing home because, well, you know why. So I rang home, and Dad answered, half asleep. I said, "Don't be panicking, but I'm in hospital." He said, "Right, okay." He said, "What's wrong with you?" I said, "Don't be panicking. I'm okay, but I've been shot." He said, "Right, okay." And he hung up the phone. I thought, fuck, he took that well. So literally, it hung up the phone, and within 3, 4 seconds, the phone rang back. And he said, "Did you just tell me you've been shot?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Right, we're coming now. We're coming now." I said, "Don't be coming. I'm going for surgery. It's like a war zone up here." He obviously was sleeping, thought he was dreaming, and panicked. What a phone call to get. What a
Jesus.
horrendous. So that was okay. I was taken in for surgery, and that was at the um, laceostomy or whatever. I can't remember the surgery on my arm, scanned.
What was on the injuries to your chest then? And
So
the rib
I so I
cage?
was I was shot with a sawed-off shotgun from
Jesus
4 meters
Christ.
away. Yeah, so the guy was 4 meters away when he hit me. I took the main blast to my arm. I think at 11 side wall of my chest and 9 in my abdomen, sort of lower abdomen. Through my nine in my abdomen, 3 of them travelled diagonally up through me and came to rest between my pancreas and my spleen.
Oh my God.
So I was very fortunate, very lucky. So yeah, that was that surgery, and woke up. I don't know if it was the next day, a few days later. I think it was the next day, but very groggy, a lot of pain, and in bits.
When
Yeah,
you were talking about the blast wave, feeling that blast, I
yeah,
was thinking, what? I was thinking you'd be shot with a pistol, maybe,
yeah,
or something from a distance. I was
yeah.
thinking, what's the blast wave? Is that his brain processing the shock of the shot? And then, no, it's
No,
sawn
I
off
was it.
shotgun
Yeah,
from 4 meters away.
yeah,
My God.
yeah. I've actually seen the footage after the event, and you can clearly see the gunman making his way from the back of the crowd, the shotgun up in the air. He makes his way to the front of the crowd, and then round the corner into the junction of which we have just taken. He goes out of sight, and you hear the bang, and then you hear the crowd cheering. So the crowd cheered as I was shot, and at the time I thought, scumbags, but here, it is what it is.
I mean, that's one way to look at it.
Yeah.
Another
Well,
way, another way to look at it is scumbags.
yeah. Well, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, you
Yeah.
were lucky there, mate.
Oh, I know. I know. Well, it's funny. The guy, Mark Taylor, who was the surgeon, he came to me again. I don't know if it was the day after or a few days after. He came to see me in the hospital room, and he's put his hand out to shake my hand, and I shook his hand. He says, "I've just shook the hand of the luckiest man in Belfast." And at that point, I was like, right. And then once he explained everything that had taken place, I was like, right, okay.
So, but what was his explanation? Where where they've gone and where they missed the organs?
So the most of them, so I still 40, I think I have 42 pellets still in me. Um, the three that entered my lower abdomen and travelled diagonally up through me, missed everything, missed my intestines, missed everything. And he said, how that happened, he says, I have no idea. He says, you are the luckiest man in the world, if not Belfast, this morning.
That is
So
crazy.
yeah, yeah. So, and that then, yeah. That was being
So you
shot.
had that incident, and yet it's not that incident that was the straw that broke the camel's back. It was falling
No,
into the water and being partially submerged.
yeah. Well, I suppose that was a big thing. I was angry that I was more angry that I wasn't getting to go on further training because that's what I wanted to do. I didn't want to. Not that there's anything wrong with it. I didn't want to be a run of the mill peeler. I didn't want to be doing files and custom shit of paperwork. But um, I wanted to do the cooler stuff. I was angry that that had nearly been taken away from me, and I suppose that probably drove me to go again and apply for HMSU. I didn't want somebody else ending the story for me. I wanted to be the master of that. I wanted to be the one that decided my fate. I wanted to be the one that's not going to lie down because some scumbag stepped out of the shadows
Mm.
in the night wearing a balaclava like a card and shot me in the back. I didn't want that to be the end of my story. So that's, I suppose, in a sense, that spurred me on to go and do what I ultimately went on to do.
So did that make it harder? Is that attitude and that desire, has that made it harder for you now to transition to being someone who's no longer part of the PSNI? Your career coming into an end, not by choice, and transitioning out. How has it been? And I'm conscious you're only like 11 months into it,
Yeah,
but I know from my own experience that is early days.
yeah,
Like early days, it took me a lot longer to get used to being out and not being part of the machine.
yeah.
A very different machine to what you were part of. But what's your experience been like since?
I would say that a massive culture shock, a massive loss of identity. That was I've I've been 20, I've been a police officer. I then went on to be an HMSU man, which is a massive, you know, I suppose within the British military, you're a soldier, you're a marine, you're whatever, and then you go on to work in the SF world, and that's very much the way HMSU and SOB would have been within policing. That CTSFO network, I was part of that, and still am part of that brotherhood, I suppose. And I'm very fortunate. Only a few weeks ago, I was at the anniversary dinner, and still have that great bond and that great network of guys around me. If all suppose the equalizers, everybody's went through that assessment. Everyone has went through selections, went through further training. Everybody has been broken down and built up again, and it's a bond that not many people get to experience. So I'm very fortunate that I had that and had that support network around me when I did start to spiral, and since I've left the police. I don't know if that answers
Uh,
uh
no, well, it does in a way. I suppose you're articulating, the things that would make it more difficult to transition out. You're talking about being part of an elite unit, is what you're talking
yeah.
about.
Hmm.
And anyone, but I think people who find it difficult who have served 20 odd years being PSNI and whatever else,
Yeah.
and they can have issues with a significant life change, a career change, especially when it's not brought about by themselves.
Yeah.
They didn't decide to do that. I experienced difficulty, and I decided to make the
Yeah.
change. You know, um, and I've mentioned it before, there are people who they get made redundant from jobs, normal
Yeah.
jobs that they've been in for 20 odd years, and there's people who have ended their lives because of it, and they were just doing X, Y, Z job in Civvy Street.
Yeah.
You know, it is a bigger thing when you get you operate in an elite units like you were, because there are fewer of you.
Yeah.
It's more significant. The people who operate in those kind of units are by their very nature more driven.
Mm.
They're more driven. They're more valuable as individuals in whatever vocation they're doing. They hold themselves to higher standards. They have ambition.
Yeah.
You know, more so that arguably more so than what people who aren't part of elite units
Yeah.
in whatever kind of service are. Which again, when it gets ripped away from you, makes it so much more difficult to transition out.
Well,
You can lose your sense of identity and
oh,
your sense of value in yourself, your position in the world,
very much so.
and that's a
Yeah.
dangerous thing.
Yeah. I think as well within the unit, I was a Fed rep within the unit. So I, like a union rep, I suppose, I would have sort of fought, fought not, but represented the guys, and I was quite a big personality in the unit
Was
as
that
well.
done by a ballot?
Very good, very good. But I would have sort of always been involved with trying to help people, whether it be welfare or support within work, or maybe even just being that conduit to senior management. And listen, the guys are this is going on at the minute. What can we do? So I was always involved in that. I was quite a big personality, I think, in the unit. Always slabbering, always
Always what?
slabbering,
Slabbering.
bantering, and
Spell slabbering.
slabbering.
Slabbering. Oh, yeah, banter,
Yeah, just having a
Gobbing
crack, and
off.
yeah, pretty much, yeah. And always, in hindsight, that was totally my mask. That was, you never wanted to admit that weakness or give that weak clink in your armor. I always felt I had to be that big personality, or had to put this front on, when actual fact it was a front. It was a mask you were wearing. And it's only now on reflection I look back and think, years ago I was spiraling out of control, but you tried to keep that front up, so.
Since when was the spiral though? Because you're talking pre nearly drowning incident, right?
Yeah. An example, I would say spiral, and spiral is probably not the right phrase, but I was certainly suffering elements of PTSD long before I recognized that I was suffering from elements of PTSD. So in the mornings, I would get up and have a shower. And every morning, I would look down and not necessarily seen it, but there would have been blood on the floor. I would have had sort of that trigger of the first time I was allowed to get a shower in the Mater Hospital, and I dried blood all over me. And I can see it, vividly see it now. On the floor was
So you'd be
blood.
hallucinating it.
Not hallucinating. No, it was more like it always would have taken me back to that. So it's just like a trigger nearly. And I'd experienced that for years. So I was starting my day, every day I was starting off, getting a shower, and that was the first thing you were thinking about. And when you're starting off from that point, your day generally isn't going to get much better. Well, it is going to get better, but it's, you're re-traumatizing yourself, not every day, but a lot of days, so. Yeah.
Yeah, spiral is. It made me think when you corrected yourself that it's not a spiral. It's not that, because I agree with you. From my own experience, I think. It really interests me that we were experiencing similar things at similar times here.
Mm-hmm.
I was getting out. I was just about to start on my last Afghan tour, and I got out the following year.
Yeah.
Got out the following year. So 2011, I got out. But I have described it as a spiral in the past, and I think listen to what you say, it's incorrect. It's more like you're existing in a state which is not healthy.
Yeah.
Not healthy, and the only reason that it is not a spiral is because you've got a routine going on, you've got a day job going on that you're really invested in, that you're really connected with. That is your life, and the spiral I experienced didn't start until that life that I knew everything about
Right. Okay.
moved.
Yeah.
And there's okay. Now it's chaos, which is chaos anyway when you change your career, for example, and you change the whole culture and community you're part of.
Yeah.
You know, and you move military side, you end up moving to a different part of the country and all sorts of things. You know, and then that spiral happens because you've got all this chaos going on, and you're already compromised. Your mind's already compromised with the shit that you've been dealing with for years that you haven't been paying attention to.
Yeah.
You know, your example, and then okay, career change, deliberate or not, and then you haven't got the full resources available to you mentally
Yeah.
to be able to manage all this massive change in your life,
Yeah.
you know, emotionally. And that's where, for me, the spiral started. It was a slow descent, you know. So I agree with that. Yeah, it's like,
I think
is that fair to describe the
no.
way
I
I
think
described it
no.
there?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It wasn't what you're chatting about there. The spiral didn't happen until way later, but I was experiencing lots of those things long before it came to that point.
Mm.
And I think you look at trauma, a police officer, I can't remember the figures exactly, but something like 400 to 600 traumatic events a police officer will experience per year, as opposed to, sorry, is that a year? No, and throughout their career, as opposed to 3 to 4 through a civilian. A military is probably the same, 4 to 600, I'm sure at least. So all that trauma builds up and builds up. For me, there was quite significant trauma, the shooting being one, a few, countless public order situations, blast bombs, whatever else, where you genuinely were fearful for your life. You then add in the countless suicides you've been to, the countless shootings you've been to, violent deaths you've been to, and other stuff.
Sorry to jump in. The number of the number of traumatic events, potentially traumatic events that are totally out of the ordinary, you're witnessing or experiencing yourself, threat to life, loss of life, you know, or extreme violence, danger of extreme injury, you know, the experience. I'll go out and say this as if I know it to be a fact, because it's also almost certainly a fact. Police, blue light services, police and ambulance for sure. Police, definitely. The number of traumatic events that you will experience in your career is orders of magnitude higher than what a military person would. Much more.
Do you believe so?
Yeah, 100%,
Mm.
mate. Right. So if you take you take myself as an example, not special forces. I served in an elite unit, right? But I was also part of infantry in general. You know, I experienced a lot of things that many infantry soldiers did in terms of Afghan and Iraq tours, or kinetic tours, right? Now, I think my first time out in Afghanistan, which was one of the probably more kinetic, a high frequency of fights with the enemy, should we say? Personally, I was in the vicinity of 150 to 200 engagements on that tour. And when I say engagements, I would say that's a two-way range, right? On that tour alone. That tour was exceptional, though, in the circumstances of it and what happened. As other tours went on, that frequency dropped down, and it got to more, and it became much less for people. And that's just a tour, right? That's just 6 months, and it's only for people who are serving on the front line of specific roles.
Yeah.
I was on that first one. I was a sniper on the front line for the entire time. All 3 times I went to Afghanistan, which were my most connect tours, were like that. Most people who serve in the military do not experience a traumatic event like that in terms of contact with the enemy.
Yeah.
What other traumatic event is there to experience? It's contact with the enemy. Most do not, just by virtue of the roles they're in within the military. Okay. And now look at it now, where it's a lower operational tempo, no one's experiencing anything. Does that mean a lot of traumatic events when you're in training? Absolutely not. There are, right? There isn't just, engaging with someone who's trying to kill you, that are traumatic events where you know this perfectly from policing. You know, there are other things, threat to life, to serious injury, whatever. But the point I'm making is it's very few. When you now look at a police officer, daily basis, never mind being Northern Ireland, police, never mind being in a city. Well, all right, in a city, some police officer in the outer fucking Hebrides is experiencing nothing. But in a city, almost on a daily basis, they must be experiencing a traumatic event. and they're, let's say, in a career for 10 years. How many working days is that? There are in inverted commas Bobby
Yeah.
on the beat. That's in a bog standard job.
Hmm.
Hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds a year. Year in, year out.
Yeah.
That's not the case for a military person. It's not the case for a frontline soldier, and it is also not the case for a special forces soldier. Blue light service is far and above, much more, much more.
Yeah.
You know,
I think it just
my math stacks up for once.
Yeah.
So
No.
it's to compare the two is not. It's so much more from the
Yeah.
police side, and that is something that people completely underestimate.
I think again, sort of flip, and it just this you speaking there reminded me of this, but policing within Northern Ireland is another level again, I believe, than anywhere else in the UK. It's not, and I'm writing the book at the minute about my experiences within policing, and I wrote in the book, policing within Northern Ireland, you don't take your uniform off, hang it in your locker, forget about it and go home. You're taking policing home with you. You have to think about, when I leave this station, is anybody following me? When I go home, am I going to be subject of attack? You need to be hyper vigilant all the time. So you get up in the mornings, you check your car, make sure there's not a device under your car. You Before you leave your house, you're checking to make sure that there's not somebody lurking, that, well, a terrorist essentially, that would want to kill you. You then drive to work. The closer you get to Belfast, these are my experiences now, the closer you get to Belfast, the more that vigilance rises. You then come on to, again, Crumlin Road, and the guys are out covering the changeover to make sure that somebody isn't attacked on their way into work. You go into work, you get changed, you go out in the street, you're dealing with public disorder, suicide, threat to you, threat to others, all sorts. You couldn't drive into some states without having bricks or petrol bombs thrown at you. Not petrol bombs, but bricks or bottles thrown at you on a daily basis. You then go home or go back to the station, get changed, drive home, repeat the process, and do it all over again. So you're never switching off. And that constant living in that state of heightened vigilance for years undoubtedly takes a toll. There's no doubt that that takes a toll. And I lived in a real nice area, a very accepting area of policing. You have police officers who are joining from a nationalist community, who that threat is raised again because all of a sudden, they are guarding that secret with their lives because somebody that they may have grown up with, or as has happened in the past, friends of theirs will turn on them, and all of a sudden there's a threat to their life. So that's what I would describe as the difference between policing in Northern Ireland and policing in the UK and even the south of Ireland.
Yeah, and going back to the point about like sanitization of the news of you, that is a reality. What you just explained there is
Yeah.
a reality that most people don't know. There's a lot of military people who've joined the military after the Troubles finished. Not finished after our Troubles finished after our presence in Northern Ireland is finished. Military presence in Northern Ireland is finished, or overt military presence. They don't know about it.
Yeah.
I only know about it because when I joined up around about the same time as you were joining the PSNI, we couldn't. So British forces, you wouldn't wear your This is in the UK, in the UK, in the mainland.
Yeah.
You wouldn't wear your uniform. You wouldn't work. You weren't allowed to walk out of camp in your uniform. I was based in Colchester in uniform because of the domestic threat of terrorism from Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
And this is a thing that people forget. This is not long ago. This is recent. It's and that was in mainland, England. And then when you think about that, think about what Chris has just said in that being a police officer in Northern Ireland, where people literally there will not take a second thought at killing you or hurting you if they get an easy opportunity and think they can get away with it.
I when I started the writing process, I wrote a few chapters, and there was an event on in the Black Box in Belfast where it's 10 by 9. I'm not sure if you've heard it. So it's 10 people get up and tell a story they've written, and it can only be 9 minutes long. So I'd written a story, and it was a nothing story. It was about me leaving my house in Clockey on the Irish Peninsula and driving to North Belfast. And the process I went through of checking my car, well, on this particular story, I forgot to check my car, and the dread, I'd driven 100 yards down the road and it just hit me. I forgot to check the car and dropping to my knees and checking on the car. It was a nothing story from that to driving to North Belfast. So I read this story at an event, and
Where was the event? Sorry.
it was in Belfast, the Black Box
Okay.
in Belfast. So I read it at an event. It was my sister-in-law had actually been on at me. You need to do this, and so I did anyway. And afterwards, the amount of people that came to me and said, "What year was that?" I said, "It was 2003." And they're like, and a few sort of looks of, but that wasn't the troubles, that because people forget very quickly that it's not that long ago. These are still the issues which police officers face today within Northern Ireland that aren't spoken about.
That must make it super difficult for support for people
Yeah,
with either in or leaving with, mental health issues, right?
yeah, and the support isn't there within the PSNI. Undoubtedly, it's a budgetary issue. Undoubtedly, there isn't enough there isn't enough finances put into the mental health support through OHW or through other schemes because the money isn't there. And it's as simple as that. You know, and I suppose policing the policing is totally underfunded. Where does the money need to go? Well, it needs to go in frontline policing first and foremost, because ultimately we're there to protect society and provide a service to society. Unfortunately, the police officers then become the victims in this whole thing because down the line they're not given the support due to lack of funding. When they've put themselves out there, they've stood up and been counted and tried to help people. They've suffered unimaginable or experienced unimaginable events, and undoubtedly that's taken its toll.
Yeah. What was the support like for you when you left? How were you? When did you realize you had a major issue that you needed to resolve?
Well, so my now wife, when we got married in October, fiance at the time,
Congratulations.
um, she could tell that I was starting to spiral at this point.
This is October gone. So this is like what, about 6 months after?
Oh
you
no,
left?
sorry, we got married in October there. But no, this is previous.
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
So this probably actually was about October 22, and around then. I asked for help in October. I think it was probably start of December and then November. So Jane said she was going to take a day off work and we are going to go for a walk. She had never been up Kahill in Belfast, so Kahill overlooks Belfast, real nice sort of walk. So I was off anyway this day. She had taken the day off work. We got in the car on the Irish Peninsula, drove to Belfast, drove up Kahill, parked in Kahill Country Park, and hadn't said a word, hadn't spoke to each other at all. Got out of the car and we
How
walked
long was that drive?
about an hour. Yeah,
Jesus.
yeah. So we got out of the car, walked to Napoleon's Nose, it's called. It's a sort of viewing point, Kahill. Still hadn't spoken, and walked back to the car. We may have spoken a few words.
Was this normal at that point?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
But so what? I don't. So what was
So
the?
probably had become normal in the weeks prior to that, where I just was very distant, very vacant.
Okay.
We got back to the car, and she said to me, "Just tell me what's wrong with you." And I'm not a crier. I burst out crying. I said, "I know what's fucking wrong with me. How can I tell you what's wrong with me when I don't know?" And that was like somebody hitting the switch. That was the whole way home. I was gripping the steering wheel. I wanted somebody to cut me up or somebody to say something so I could rip them out of the car. I was flipping. I was just didn't know what planet I was on. I was just angry, cross at myself. Got home and I lay on the sofa and slept for about 3 hours. Meanwhile, she had made some inquiries, had found a psychologist, a clinical psychologist, guy called Michael Patterson, Dr. Michael Patterson. Reached out to him and he undoubtedly saved my life. He's a fascinating guy. So Michael himself was blown up with an RPG. He has no arms.
In Ireland.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm going to say West Belfast. I think it was West Belfast. He was blown up very young. He was only a few weeks married at this stage, and totally. So his career was over. Left the police and reinvented himself as a psychologist, counselor, and is probably one of the leading lights in EMDR therapy now. So yeah. So Jane had reached out to him. I started seeing Michael. And again, my ignorance around mental health totally at that stage, when he asked me what did I know about EMDR therapy and CBT. And my reply was, to be honest, as far as I'm concerned, this is tree hugging hippie bullshit and it's not for me. 10 minutes later, I was crying again. I thought, he could be onto something here. And that undoubtedly saved my life. So I started seeing Michael on a weekly basis. And he made the point, you're never going to get better whilst you're still in that environment. You've had 20 odd years of trauma. Whilst you're still in that environment, there is no hope for you getting better. I went sick by the stage I knew I couldn't be in work. And that was the start of the process then. I was then sent to OHW, and again, they made the point, you're not going to get any better whilst you're still in this environment. So we want to think about the ill health retirement process. And that was it. And that was a hard one to swallow. That was a hard pill to swallow from somebody who'd always been suck it up and get on with it. Tighten up, to all of a sudden the career's over. A big part of your identity is now being lost. And that took a lot to come to terms with. And I still am, to a certain degree, but I suppose much in the same vein in 2010, where I didn't want that to be the end of my story. I don't want leaving the police to be the end of my story either. I joined the police to help people. What I'm doing now, I still want to help people. And if by sharing my story and raising that awareness around the mental health and around that side of things helps one person, well, do you know what? It's worth it. If sharing my story and normalising and humanising policing within Northern Ireland, stops somebody from joining a paramilitary organisation or changes somebody's outlook towards policing, well then, do you know what? It's worth it. How can I not do it? I'd rather look back in 10 years and say, I wish I had give that a go, and I wish I had done something. I believe, a unique story to share, and if by doing that helps people, why wouldn't I do it? So
it was a mistake people, not a mistake people make. I think one of the reasons a lot of people get caught out with trying to cope with leaving something major that they were part of, a major part of their lives, is that they mistakenly think or feel that their identity has been ripped away, and that's because the thing that they were part of was their identity. In reality, that's not the case. Your identity is who you are. Who you are now is who you are now. The PSNI, it formed who you are now, but it's not who you are now. It just played a massive part in forming who you are now. And it's this realization I had to come to myself over time. The same thing. Yeah, and a lot of people, they make it harder for themselves trying to adjust, because it's also something you don't want to let go of, right? And you can't really do it in Northern Ireland, but over here, it's everything some people always do or say, or their talking points or their profiles on social media always will indicate, oh yeah, I was X, Y, Z unit, or I was a soldier, I'm a veteran.
Pull up a sandbag.
Or they connect their identity with an illness.
Yeah.
In a bio, I have PTSD, I have ADHD, I have autism, I have X, Y, Z thing. And to me, it's like, whoa, no. That's not who you are.
Yeah.
These things, don't attach yourself to that label, because you can never get away from them then, and you'll feel like it always compromises you not being a part of that thing you're a part of, or that illness or situation that you're in, be it mental or physical. You know, you end up letting those things be the decider of who you are, not you yourself and the way you conduct yourself, who you are. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no,
That
I
make
totally
sense?
agree
Okay,
with you.
okay.
I would say being a police officer within Northern Ireland is something I'm very proud of. There's various chapters to my life to this date, but I've still a lot to write. You know, I when I was sort of leaving and coming to terms with leaving policing and being part of such a sort of well regarded and high profile unit, very proud of that. But then all of a sudden that ride's over. I thought, well, what am I going to do now? You know, who am I? And I had to ask myself these questions, and that's when I come up with. So I started doing a bit of speaking around the mental health side of things, the PTSD side of things, but also I'm taking the skills, the softer skills through communication, critical thinking, all that side of stuff into the corporate world. Thought, well, I want to reinvent myself as something else, using the experiences I have before and utilizing that to move forward. And that's when I come up with what I've started, Permetum. So Permetum's Latin for moving forward, and it comes from Permetum Pergendum. At the time, I thought, what I want to do, well, I want to move forward, but I'm shitting myself. So so the Latin Permetum Pergendum is moving forward despite the presence of fear. So I've taken that Permetum and I've sort of registered a company as Permetum, and that's what I'm doing now. I'm taking that forward.
And the company does what?
Public speaking around mental health and to charities. I'm hoping to do a lot more charity work, and also taking the softer skills from policing into that corporate world. So chatting about resilience, critical thinking, teamwork, and mediation, all that side of stuff as well. So,
Yeah.
but it's time. It's time. This is the next chapter of my life. It's not. I am very proud, as I say, of what I've been involved in, what I've done. I know I've got a very unique story to share, and I'm hoping that by sharing that, I'm not. I'm not. It doesn't make me, but these are my experiences. Like we said at the start, everyone has a story. This is just my story. And if by sharing my story helps people, then why would I not do it?
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. You know, and you're right. You know, your experiences and your understanding of things that happen to you and the situations, it's invaluable.
Mm-hmm.
It's invaluable. You're able to articulate it very well. You know, and not a lot of people are able to do that who've been through a real shit time, or been through really unusual experiences, and can find it difficult to articulate it, or just don't ever want to do it.
Yeah.
You know, so it's good what you're doing. I totally support it. Especially being PSNI,
Mm.
especially. It wasn't until you contacted me about this that it made me think. Just in the conversation we had on the phone initially, I thought, holy shit. Yeah, there's a general lack, I think, over here anyway. There's a general lack of support for blue light services in terms of, and awareness
Yeah.
in terms of the crap that they have to deal with over here. And I thought, my God, it has to be even worse, way worse in Northern Ireland
Yeah.
because of those dynamics you've talked about. It is a 24/7 existence.
Yeah.
A 24/7 existence. You cannot switch off from the very real threat. And yes, the threat has reduced over time.
Mm-hmm.
It is a fraction of what it was in the past, but the threat's still there. The threat is still there, and it is a threat that does not exist in England at the moment. Does
Yeah.
not exist and hasn't done for
Yeah.
a long time. Until the late 90s. 94, I think, was the last. 1994, I think, was the last domestic
Canary
terrorist
Wharf, was
attack.
it?
Yeah.
Was that Canary Wharf? Was it 94?
I'm not
I
sure.
can't
I'll have to
remember.
Google it, but 94. So, 94 IRA attack. If it was the IRA,
But I
I'm
think
assuming
as
it's IRA.
well the
Pyra. No. 1994. Yeah. Provisional Irish Republican Army intensified its bombing campaign in mainland Britain, particularly targeting London. One notable attack was the Baltic Exchange bombing in April 1994, which caused significant damage, estimated at £800 million. Like, whenever I read over these things, it reminds me, my children aren't aware of this.
Yeah.
You know, if I go home later and talk to my daughters and go, I mean, randomly bring it up. Hey, did you know that like people in
Yeah,
Northern Ireland used to come and bomb like bombers in London, like when your dad
yeah,
was young? What? Nah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's funny when you bring up the kids. So for years, my children always thought the story was I was always checking under the car for cats because years ago a cat had got up under the bonnet and so for years that's what my children thought. And it was only like, a few years ago my daughter said, "You weren't checking for cats all these years. Now I know now what you were doing." And when I left the place and told them I was leaving, my daughter said to me, "Good, I don't have to worry about you going to work anymore." See, when she said that,
Wow.
I thought, because I had always thought that I had shielded them from
Mm.
that, and I did my best to do that. But when I was shot, for example, they were only young. The story has always been I fell off my bike and a snake bit me. So it was a jokey story we told the kids because just we didn't. Your daddy's been shot. Who wants to tell their kids their dad's been shot? So it
Mm.
was I fell off my bike and a snake bit me, and that's what the scar on my arm is. And now they obviously know, I do this. I can't hide it from them. They're 17, 15, 14 now. But um, so yeah, it's only now when you think it's not only the police officer that's experienced it, it's their family, the wives, husbands, children, their husbands, whatever, going out to work and not knowing if they're going to be injured or if something's going to happen or if something's going to happen at home. They're the things that we probably take for granted. And, I was always thinking about me, policing and the threat to me, but it's those sort of subconscious issues that you're bringing home with you, which you don't mean to, but, undoubtedly you do,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Right. Got shed loads of questions in here from I need to get into with you
See,
from
before we do it, would it be possible to go to
little boy's room.
little boy's room?
Well, I'm going to take a pause. I'm back in 5 minutes. All right. Let's get into these questions. So, sorry, I'm just checking through because I've already asked you a couple of these. How would you describe PSNI culture? Were there any issues, for example, with bullying or alcohol, etc.? Describe the culture. What was it like?
Culture has changed massively from when I first started to when I left. When I started, again, was that part of me changing as well? I was very young, 20, came into a section which was very young, very social. So alcohol, yeah, alcohol was massive. We're out all the time. Initially, we used to work 4 days on, 4 days off. So the middle day you finished at 7 o'clock. Second day you finished at 7 o'clock and didn't start till 7 the next evening. So we finished at 7 p.m. Didn't start at 7 p.m. the following evening. We always went out. It was just that we were going out. You then had 4 rest days. You maybe working one or two of them, but we'd have been out, one or two of the other rest days. Yeah, alcohol was a big thing. Culture around bullying, I didn't really. Again, that's a tricky question because where does banter stop and bullying begin? That's subjective, isn't it? I personally didn't see anything that I can remember, springs to mind that I would say that was that was bullying or that was. There's times I've seen stuff, that was out of order. You shouldn't have said that or whatever. But Joe, how's that any different to working on a construction site, working in a flipping office?
Yeah, the bullying thing is subjective. Well, the banter bullying thing is subjective to a certain degree. Now, I thought about this a lot because I've mentioned this on the podcast before because in the past I have been part of what I would describe now looking back as bullying 100% from a group to an individual. Now, at the time, I didn't see it like that. I saw it as banter. Now, in hindsight, it was clear. If you were on the outside looking in, someone could be a fly in the wall over those periods of months, it went on. I think it would be quite obvious that it wasn't banter. it would be bullying. And maybe that isn't intended that way, right? Because there's an intent aspect to this, right? And I certainly didn't intend to bully someone, but I think to answer your question, when does banter become bullying? Or when does banter become not correct, not acceptable? And I think that it's at the point where an individual or a group of people are being singled out for the banter, and they are taking it negatively. They are not part of that. Which, and this is like boys, men's, social interactions, very different to women, and also it's also very different to certain communities, military, police, anything where your life's basically a bit different. You have to deal
Yeah.
with threats and stuff, or train for threats. And in the example I'm talking about, there was a bunch of us. This guy was part of that circle of that social circle, except, and we would all rip the piss out of each other. We would have banter, but where he was concerned, it would be,
Crossing the line.
nah, I wouldn't say crossing the line. I think he wouldn't receive it well, or he wasn't reciprocating. So he would take the banter, but he wouldn't be reciprocating back and being jovial in general over months.
Yeah.
And he wasn't partaking of the banter per se. So his only taking part in the banter was he was on the receiving end, and that, to me, that is an indicator of the person is not okay with this. They're not comfortable in this kind of environment, or they're not comfortable in this kind of banter in inverted commas. And in hindsight, and what I certainly would do now in these because these situations still exist. Banter still goes on. It's part and parcel of how we communicate with each other. I learn now they're not okay with that. And we do that, I think, as we get older. You crack a joke, or you think you're getting to know someone, and you're testing out how far you can go where humor's concerned. And when I say testing how far you can go where humor's concerned, is how much can I personally attack them in a humorous nature before they get pissed off? That's winding up, right? How far can I go with them? And you find that boundary, and then you know the limit. You know the banter limit. Yeah. I know that now. Wasn't thinking about that back then.
That's how you have evolved and become who you are now. Right. So, undoubtedly we all have. I done exactly what you've just described? Undoubtedly I have. I can't, there's nothing springs to mind one individual time where that's happened, but I know for a fact I've been involved in banter where somebody hasn't taken it well. Undoubtedly we all have, not only within work, but in my personal life as well.
You can have isolated incidents, and that's just one off. Like, took that a bit too far. But if it's repeated and prolonged, when it becomes obvious that this isn't being taken well, this person's not comfortable, or they're quiet, or you just reading the unspoken signs.
Yeah, I think the latter end of my career, obviously being within the unit, purely male environment, and there was undoubtedly more dark humor, black humor. There was more banter. There was more piss taking. Undoubtedly there was, but it was a coping mechanism. You're spending days upon days in the car with guys, and well, part of the reason for the assessment, can you spend days upon days with these guys? Are they on the same wavelength? So the culture within the unit was a very close knit unit where some people take banter better than others. On the other side, do people hand it out but can't take it? Absolutely. And that's massive too. Did I see any prolonged periods of bullying? Not that I can remember. Not that I can remember. The culture within the PSNI, from my early days experience, I initially was stationed in Tennant Street. Then from Tennant Street to a station called Old Park, which is no longer there. It was a country style station in the middle of Belfast. So you had Ardoyne on one side, who didn't want you. You had the Shankill, Ballysillen. It was surrounded. So very quickly, and I feel, well, even using this phrase in your presence, you develop that siege mentality, where everybody is fighting for each other or looking out for each other. So it does in my experiences within those environments, you got to know people really, really well, and you knew how far you could push it. And if somebody had said something out of turn, generally somebody else would have spoken up. One of the other
Mm,
guys or girls would have spoken up. So I certainly didn't see any
mm.
bullying or
You touched on something there, which is I think is a totally underestimated, um, a totally underestimated, not test, but situation or environment or culture, not a culture, situation or environment that people like yourself have had to deal with. Lots of military people have to deal with it, but very few can. But I think very few of this general civilian population we threw into a situation will be able to handle it well, and that is prolonged periods of time in isolation with a small group of people. You know, having breaks. But being out your entire day for days on it, weeks and months on end, was the same group of people. You're not speaking with anyone else. The only people you're communicating with is maybe 2 or 3 or 8, 9, 10, or sometimes more than that. Platoon size within the military, like 20, 25 people. That is a test. That is a test. And one of the places you clearly see how difficult people find it who haven't been eased into that situation is the program I don't think it's on anymore, Big Brother. And you see people
mm-hmm.
go in there thinking it's going to be a breeze. No, 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 no. You're getting locked in a room. You're getting locked in a few rooms in a building with people who you don't know them. You think you know a few of them. You don't know them. And you're going to find out how hard it is to deal with people you don't know, and how hard it is to try and forge relationships that get along with people that you have got no choice but to do so. And people will snap. And you see in
cracks
Big Brother
develop.
the people that cannot do it. And very few of them are able to do it well and not lose their shit.
Yeah.
Because it's super difficult. One of the really interesting things about that, I think, were people who've done that for a long time, people in the police, ambulance service as well, fire service for sure, and the military is, my God, we are so good at quickly forming relationships, quickly understanding the boundaries, and knowing how to ease into a relationship and build it to a point, and to a point where you can build that camaraderie up real quick.
Yeah.
And we do that in order to be able to know who we can trust and what we can trust them with. How reliable is someone? That's what it's all about.
100%. And sort of to take that a step further, you learn very quickly how to sort of make relationships, but then you have to learn again how to maintain those relationships. It's one thing making a relationship or building that relationship with somebody, but maintaining that over weeks, months, years takes work. And I think that's a skill that you're taught within policing, within military, blue light industry. You're taught it, and people, they really don't appreciate that in itself as a skill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, next question from Coke. Are there any key moments in your career you'd change how you acted?
Yeah, undoubtedly there is. Of course there is. Did I?
Would you have wrapped that hickory stick around the head of that guy who was asking you about the
I do it now
window?
if I got a chance. I'm only joking. I'm only joking. Yeah.
Joking, disclaimer.
That's a joke.
Fine.
That's a joke. Is there? Yeah, of course there is. Did I always get it right? No, it didn't. Of course it didn't. But can I look now with the maturity and the experiences that I have and reflect on that? Could I have acted better? Well, yeah. The day that we can sit in bed at night and think I flipping did everything right yesterday. Well, you've nailed it, and none of us have nailed it. So, was there times I was maybe more physical with somebody than I probably could have been or should have been? Yeah, undoubtedly there was. Did I do it at that time from a position of belief that I was doing the right thing or was doing it to protect myself or others? Yeah, I honestly believe it did. In reflection, could have done it better, could have acted better, could have maybe changed things. Yeah, that's, is there any of us can say that they wouldn't go back and change the way they acted in a certain situation? There's plenty of times where I probably could have behave better towards members of the public. Excuse me. But I, again, going back to that mentality and that probably immaturity, where it was very much them and us. You're working in a hostile environment, and all of a sudden you become you maybe treat people more hostile than you should have, because you're always perceiving that threat from members of the public, and maybe they maybe didn't present the threat that I perceived at the time.
Mm.
That was a bit of a waffle on that, but
No,
yeah,
what was it like working with the British military?
really good. Yeah,
Good answer.
yeah, brilliant asset, brilliant asset. I've worked at a variety of levels with the British military. Going back when I was 20 and starting in Tennant Street, we had an old system. It was like a detailing system called Mars. I logged on this day to see next week I'm MLO. I thought, what the fuck's an MLO? So military liaison officer, for those that don't know. I was like 21, and I was put in the back of, so it was the Royal Argyle, I'm nearly sure. So I had the Black Watch for the Royal Argyle, and one of the guys, the sergeant, he says, just keep them out of Ardoyne, keep them out of the New Lodge, don't let them fight with anybody. So that was my brief, and it was basically taking the military out and telling them where to do VCPs. So I'm like 21, essentially in charge of telling these guys where they can and can't go. And yeah, but they were brilliant. They're a great asset to have with you when times were sticky. Plenty of riots, where if it hadn't been for the military, it would have been a lot worse for police on the ground. And then sort of in the latter end of my career, obviously worked a lot with more covert side of things, and brilliant guys.
Would you meet any of the criminals you dealt with? You must have met some anyway.
I can tell you a story around that. I wasn't going to, but so
why were you not going to?
I wasn't, because I don't think I've told it publicly before. So
can you tell it publicly?
Yeah, I can. Yeah,
cool,
yeah.
Do it.
So the guy that shot me, or the guys that were involved in my shooting, I should say, they were arrested and interviewed in relation to the shooting. Undoubtedly, they were heavily involved, if not the trigger men. They were heavily involved with the shooting. A number of months after, probably 6 months after, I was sent to an OHW appointment in Antrim Road Barracks. I was driving out of the station after having the OHW appointment. Anytime I left the station, I always would have my PPW under my leg, because pistol under my leg, because ultimately it's a choke point. It's you're most vulnerable leaving or entering a station. That's your, it's just an area of vulnerability. So I always did that. As I was waiting on the barrier coming up, the two guys who I knew had been involved in my shooting walked out beside my car, laughing and joking.
Did they know you were in the car?
No. So they've been in signing bail. I knew that they'd been involved in my shooting, and I had my hand on my pistol under my leg. And I thought, these two fuckers nearly stopped me for seeing my kids grow up. And they're laughing and joking like it's nothing. And so yes, have I met? Well, I didn't stop and have a conversation, but that's one that springs to mind.
My God,
yeah,
the temptation must have been almost overwhelming.
Not at all, professional. But in a sort of funny turn of events, I didn't know who these guys were prior to that. Well, I didn't think I did. I was going through old notebooks. I'd stopped the two of them 3 months before they shot me. I'd stopped the two of them and searched them on the Antrim Road, a few months beforehand. So it just shows you how things develop.
Oh my God. Was the Catholic or the Protestant community more difficult to deal with? If none stand out, would you be honest if one of them was more difficult? If none stand out, would you be honest if one of them was more difficult? If none, which one was more difficult? Catholic or Protestant?
I'm not, and this isn't a politician's answer, and I'm going to get into it, but on any one day, they both could be very difficult. But let's call a spade a spade. It's the nationalist community, or elements within the not the national community, sorry. It's subversive elements within the national community who were trying to kill police. So I would have to say that that was the more difficult for me to be dealing with, because when you're in those hardline Republican areas, you had one eye on the problem you were dealing with. Should that be a domestic, a everyday crime, and another eye watching your back and watching your colleagues? Was there going to be an IED? Was there going to be a gun attack? So for me, the nationalists, I wouldn't say Catholic, because I think that sort of Catholic, Protestant, who cares? It's not about religion. It's the subversive elements within the Catholic community made it more difficult to deal with run of the mill crimes in those nationalist Catholic areas.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay. What's the most enjoyable and the most difficult rank in the PSNI?
I don't know. I was a con. I never went. So within my area, I quite early on, it was either go up, go through the promotion process, or go sideways into the CT world. I had always wanted to go into the CT world. I would say, from experience and from colleagues, everyone would say the sergeant within, probably the sergeant within HMSU, or that C4 role is one of the best roles in the police. But I can only talk about my specific, journey, and that was working in special operations branch as a constable.
Okay. I'm going to ask you a question in a minute. If you don't want to do this, and just let me know, we'll bin this one off. What are your thoughts on the Kinahan cartel and how to deal with them?
They're massive, and I'm happy enough
Okay.
chatting about it. I don't know much about it, but they're gangsters and mobsters. They're mafiosa, worldwide mob. How do you, how do you deal with it? I don't have the answers for it. I can just say that, they're so well organized, or appear to be so well organized, and we've talked about funding. They're well funded. They are well funded. The fingers and pies everywhere. I don't know. I don't have the answer for it. I think it's a massive global issue now that has, not to say be allowed, but they've managed to take themselves to the world stage. How do you deal with that? I don't know.
Mhm. What do you think is the best armed police unit in the world?
HMSU.
HSU. Good answer. How do PSNI riot tactics compare to British military riot tactics?
I'm not too sure. I've trained along with, and this is quite a while ago, trained along with British military in public order. We used to do a thing every year. It was called Celtic Avenger. It was a training operation down in Ballykindler. You had to train along with the military. They had to play at Civ Pop, and you always went home black and blue from it. I think the problem with the military coming in, they're always on a rotation. So dealing with public disorder in Northern Ireland, they were maybe dealing with it for 6 months at a time, then they're away and not back again. Whereas the RUC, prior to the PSNI and then PSNI, it was a wealth of knowledge and experience built up over many, many years. And they just had developed. So I would say that the PSNI's understanding and dealing with public disorder in Northern Ireland, and I only speak about Northern Ireland, was second to none. It was very hard to parachute, a military battalion or whatever in and throw them into the deep end when there's serious public disorder going on, when you had police force who had developed and learned through experience of how to deal with that year after year. Again, local knowledge as well, was key when it comes to stuff like that.
Yeah, I agree. I think finishing it off, what would you, if you had a magic wand, what would you wave? How would you wave that my one right now? What would you want to bring about if you wanted to change the minds and the perception of like PSNI service persons who are maybe suffering from mental ill health for whatever reason, or they're out, and they maybe know they're not well, they think they're not well, they're not sure, they're unhappy, or something's bothering them, not quite sure. Or to your point, you said something earlier, actually, when you said when your fiance at the time asked you, "Tell me what's wrong," and you burst into tears because you couldn't explain it. Again, I was saying earlier, similarities. I have had exactly the same experience.
Yeah.
Where I got asked the same question by someone and I burst into tears immediately for the same reason.
Yeah.
And it is a real common problem. How do you, when you're in that position, how do you go and seek help and ask help when you don't know what the question is you should be asking? Hi, can I get some help, please? What for? What's the issue? No idea.
Yeah.
No idea. I just know I think it's destroying me.
Yeah.
It is a horrendous thing. On another point that you made earlier is that, we're super proud of our service. You're super proud of your service. You're someone who sees yourself as reliable, sees yourself as a reliable person within the units you served in, and a valuable member of the teams you're part of. And then all of a sudden you get to a situation where I've got this issue and I can't solve it.
Yeah.
But everything in your mind says, I'll deal with this myself. I'll solve it. I'm fucking strong. I've got all the knowledge, all the experience. I can just fix this myself.
Yeah.
And it isn't the case. And it is a real common issue. And I think, people need to understand how common it is. I experienced the same thing. I made the mistake of thinking I could fix it myself for way too long, years, way too long, and it just compounded the issue. What would you say to people right now, like former colleagues or people serving
Well,
similar
I think
backgrounds?
there's sort of two elements to that, in that, when I look at my own experience, I'm the eldest of four brothers. So you're always the fixer. You're always the one trying to fix everyone's problems. I then joined the police. People are bringing their problems to you on a daily basis. You're dealing with problems. Then went into the unit and became a Fed rep. So I'm now trying to help people again within my role. And I've always been the sort of person that wants to help people. You always want to. You think, well, nothing can hurt me. I'll get on with it. I was shot, for fuck's sake. And I'm still going. And that was always my attitude. And then, because I always seen it as a weakness, sort of thinking, if I admit that I am not well here, if I am struggling, it's a weakness. Whereas now I see it as one of my biggest strengths. I can say, do you know what, I'm having a shit day. And that, not only as an individual, but that makes you it makes a team better. If you have within your team, if you're able to put your hand up and say, I'm having a shit day, can I sit on the bench for a couple of weeks? I just need to sort my shit out. I don't really know what's going on. I just need to sort my shit out. I'm not giving you the best part of me. I'm not going to be the best part of this team. And a team's only as strong as its weakest member, as we know. So it's a strength to be able to put your hand up and say, I'm not feeling 100% here. I need some help. I need some guidance. That ultimately that's where we need to get. How do we get there? By education, and that's what part of what I'm doing now. I'm more than happy to go in and speak to people. I've worked in a male macho environment, and you can't admit weakness. I'm now chatting openly to the guys and saying, see if you're not feeling 100%, put your hands up. And since I have done this, the amount of people that's reached out to me and spoke to me about things, and I've signposted them or helped them along the way. Not and this isn't me saying, "Oh, look at me." That's not what it's about. But it's about helping people and about raising that awareness, and trying to make this better, so that it's not that dirty wee secret that you're not feeling well. Mental health isn't that sort of that dirty word that we can't talk about. There needs to be positive action around it. There needs to be education and awareness around it.
Yeah, I agree. The more people that reframe it in their head, the better. It needs to be. You need to frame mental health in your mind in the same way as physical health. Physical good health, physical bad health, mental ill health, mental good health. And when we're physically ill, we most of us will go through a period of rest. And then if rest doesn't work, then maybe you might try some exercise yourself, maybe do some Googling about this physical injury you've got. And then maybe if that doesn't work, then we go and seek help. We go to the GP, whatever. The same practice needs to be done for mental ill health. And, I think actually it's easier. I think it's almost it's easier to reframe it for people like yourself and myself and military or blue light services backgrounds, where we come from environments where we exist in a team, a unit, whatever size that is, and we have we go out let's say you go out on a task for the day, and you end up in a situation. Let's say up in a riot situation, much like you were describing earlier on, the riot situation where you got shot, but in the build up to that, you were talking through it, and it got to a point where the other inspector got called in to try and get a grip of the situation. So you had a unit which basically went, we can't solve this ourselves. We need extra help.
Yeah.
Other inspector comes in. It's the same way in that in your mental ill health. It's like, okay, you try and fix it yourself, but there are assets available to us.
Yeah.
There are resources available to us that you can draw on to help improve your mental state. And improving your mental state is awesome for yourself. It's also awesome for everyone you're involved with, from close family and friends to your colleagues at work. It's also excellent for career progression. It's also excellent for quality of life. It's also excellent for life expectancy. The harsh reality is that the longer you are mentally unwell for, be that temporary or be that long term, the more impact it has on your life expectancy. Like, it's fact.
Yeah.
The longer you're unhappy for, unnecessarily unhappy, be it depression, be it unnecessary anxiety, be it resolvable depression, be it PTSD, the longer that goes undealt with for, the more it impacts your life expectancy. And that may sound dramatic. It's an absolute fact.
It's fact.
It's an absolute fact, because it impacts you physically. Your mental ill health directly impacts your physical ill health.
They come hand in glove, undoubtedly. If you're more active, if you're looking after yourself physically, you're out training, you're going to the gym, you're out for a run, whatever, even out in nature, just get out there. Ultimately that is going to help your mental health, and vice versa. If you start looking after, be more aware of your mental health, you'll then start to be more conscious about your physical health. So to me, it's hand in glove. I think sorry, I know we're finishing up here, but I think for me, a big thing or a milestone in my career was the change. When I look back, a major incident I was involved in was a shooting. It was a paramilitary shooting, loyalist shooting. A guy was shot in the face with a shotgun, and I dealt with it. I blasted quite badly. Tried to save him. He died. We went from that to 20 seconds later running round the back alleyways, because the gunmen apparently had ran in the alleyway, run around alleyways with their guns out looking for these gunmen. Didn't know what we were going to do, because I was a young police officer at the time. Run about with the guns out. 20 minutes after that, the recording set up. The guy had died, he was taken away. Recording set up, and I was standing on a cordon line, still covered in blood. Stood in the cordon for about 9 hours, 10 hours. Was relieved later that night and came into work the next morning as if nothing had happened. You look back now, so where policing has got to, there'd be aftercare, there'd be a PIM, post-incident management, and, where policing has got now, and military too, I'm aware, is in a much different place, but it still needs to get a lot better. And to me, that's awareness and education.
Yeah.
It has to be.
Yeah, I totally agree. Awareness and education, the first point of help for yourself is yourself, and being aware that you may have an issue, you may be unwell, and if you even suspect that, because you will suspect that because you notice changes in yourself over a prolonged period of time or a short term, then just go and get help. And it can be totally overwhelming these days with all the amount of different organizations and charities and things out there, and that exist to support a variety of different health issues, mental and physical. If you are confused or it's overwhelming, the first point of call is GP. It's either GP or it's your point of contact at work. That's it. Just go. Literally, just anyone.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. Anyone.
Another good point, I think, is I'm talking about police in your military career, but a guy, an accountant, a banker, their battlefield is is that, you know, that's their stressful day. That's the shit and the stress that they're dealing with on a daily basis, and ultimately that has an effect on them. That's their battlefield, and it's no less than what I went through, what you went through. It's that is their individual stressors, and it's being aware of that. You know, this isn't just, you know, if you're in the military, if you're in the police, this is everybody needs to be more aware in the corporate world, and, you know, in the business world, in the blue light industry, in the military. You know, everybody, it's across the board. It's not just specific to veterans, to ex police officers, ex paramedics, firefighters, you know, doctors, nurses. There just needs to be education and funding as well across the board. But again, my opinion.
Yeah, totally agree. How can people follow what you're doing? Get hold of you, or track you online?
Well,
Track was totally the wrong phrasing.
So I am shit at social media for obvious reasons. I've avoided it for the last 20 odd years. I'm getting to grips with it. I now have Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, apparently. So it's Chris Stothers /Permetum on all of those. And my website is Permetum Consultancy.
Perfect. I'll put the links to those in the blurb of this very podcast. If you're listening on your podcast app, the links to Chris's profiles are in the blurb. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Book plans?
So the book is well underway. I had set myself the task of being finished by March, but life has just got in the way. I'm running a bit behind. So the working title for the book I have at the minute is called Courage in the Chaos. A bit cheesy, but it's a story of modern day policing in Northern Ireland and PTSD. Not that that's the label I want to put to it, but it's my story of modern day policing. And I suppose to go back onto the social media thing, when I started this social media, put stuff out in social media and started getting all these comments, as you'd expect, you know, and, you know, the only decent police officer is a dead police officer and all this carry on and blah, blah. And I just let it wash over me. The one comment that I let
Don't read the comments. God damn it.
But you know what? I'm not even going to get into it. I'm not going to get into it. So the one comment that actually annoyed me was some guy who looked quite affluent, had quite a social media presence, and he just put the comment, "You'll never experience what the RUC experienced." And that sort of that hurt me to a certain degree, because I am not for 1 second saying that I did experience what the RUC and some members of the RUC experienced. And, you know, undoubtedly the RUC paved the way for policing today in Northern Ireland and went through a horrendous time. I am just talking about my experiences of modern day policing in Northern Ireland, and that's what the book's about.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Don't read the goddamn.
Don't read the comments.
No, read the comments.
Yeah.
It's not too bad for the well, it's pretty good for the podcast. Very rarely get a negative comment, but every so often, if I'm reading through, I see one and go, "Oh God, it stings." Even though it's coming from a place absolutely detestful individual, probably just some keyboard warrior, still like, "Oh
I know.
God." No, never read them. Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining over for this.
No, thank you. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Next time you're over, you know, anytime you're over, let us know. We'll do another one. And anything I can do to help with what you're doing now, more than happy to support. And like I said, I'll get you introduced to some of the police folks.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Cool.
Cheers, man.
Good luck.
Thank you.